Hello, everyone. Welcome, and bienvenidos a todos to the MIT Professional Education Digital Plus Program webinar, focusing on human-centered innovation. We're so happy to have you all here with us today. Thank you very much for joining us to what will be undoubtedly a fantastic session. My name is Liz Coffey, and I will be facilitating the webinar this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. So as we're all entering the session, I'd like to take a few moments to confirm a few ground rules before we get started today. This session will be in English. However, we have a simultaneous interpretation into Spanish. So if you prefer to listen to the audio in Spanish, please switch now to the Spanish channel. Para los hispanohablantes, está disponible la interpretación simultánea del webinar en el otro canal y pueden seleccionar esta opción cambiando el canal de audio. And switching back into English, we'd like to encourage everyone to turn on your cameras today and leave them on. However, please keep your microphones muted throughout the session so that we can give both Svafa and Gilad our full attention. Also, please feel free to send questions in both English and Spanish in the chat. If we're able to answer those questions during the sessions, we will do so. And we will also have a dedicated 10 or 15-minute Q&A session at the end. Great, so now that we have the rules out of the way, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor Svafa Grönfeldt and Gilad Rosenzweig, who will be leading the session, and they are also the instructors of the brand new MIT Professional Education Digital Plus Programs course, Designing High Impact Solutions with MITDesignX, which launches November 30th in both English and Spanish. So Professor Svafa Grönfeldt is a professor of practice at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and she is a founding member of DesignX, among other organizations, which focuses on the design and development of new ventures created at MIT. Gilad Rosenzweig is an architect and urban planner, and he's also the executive director of MITDesignX. And apart from their roles teaching at MIT and beyond, they both have extensive experience in creating companies and running innovation and entrepreneurship projects related to architecture, organizational design, and more. So they don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Svafa and Gilad. Thank you both so much for being here with us today and taking the time out of your busy schedule. So please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. We're really happy to be with you today. So I'm Svafa, and together with my colleague Gilad, we're going to talk about today human-centered innovation, the concept of human-centered innovation, and really talk about why it's so critically important to kind of resist the temptation of just jumping to solutions before we fully understand and take the time and have the courage to really understand the underlying problem or need we're trying to solve. And then we try to kind of link that back to the issue of engaging with complex problems and how the different stakeholders come into play. And of course, more than happy to answer any questions you might have. We have about an hour today, so we will leave some time at the end of the session for you to ask questions, but we're also more than happy to do so kind of as we go throughout. And Liz, I'm sure you will kind of run that for us and make sure that if there are any urgent questions as we go through, you let us know. More than happy to answer some of those.
Great.
So we believe actually that the scope and the intensity of the challenges our planet is facing, the complexity of information, the complexity of our lives actually is calling for a new approach to innovation and entrepreneurship, like a human-centered approach to innovation and entrepreneurship. And the reason we say that is this, basically. Research is showing that more than 95% of innovation initiatives fail. 92% of startups fail. And the reason they fail is because they tend to launch solutions into the world that there's no need for. They launch something into the marketplace there's no need for it. So more than 42% of companies that failed last year failed because of this. There was no market need for the gizmo or the solution they created. They were convinced it would be the perfect success. They were convinced enough to develop it and launch it, only to find out later that there was no market need for it. 40% of those folks participating in the study, for instance, said that they ignored customers. 17% of them said that they knew that they were launching an unfriendly product. So altogether, it's like 70% of the reason why startups fail or innovation projects fail is because of the lack of this empathy, to take the time to really understand what is the problem we're trying to solve. And another big reason is that these founders and innovators, they said that they failed because they didn't have the right team. The team was either too much alike, or the team couldn't work across disciplines, or for whatever reason it was, they didn't have the right team to pull this through. So this is kind of the center point of our course. We talk about how can you achieve this perfect solution problem fit to make sure that you don't just launch a gizmo into the world that doesn't work. And then also, how can you build the right team around your idea and to make it happen? And this applies, you might be in a corporation, you might be just thinking about a better way to run your company, you might be doing corporate innovation, you might be developing new products, or you might be creating a new process within your own company, or you might be wanting to change the world. You know, you might have this idea for social innovation that you want to bring about in your neighborhood. But it all kind of comes down to these two basic principles of really understanding the need and the problem that the humans have, that you intend your solution for, and then also bringing together the team that can actually make that happen. So, but why on earth does this happen? You know, why on earth does this happen? Why do we do that? Why do we go ahead and we launch something that we even might know is not working? And Steve Jobs, actually, he got it right. He said, you got to start with the customer experience and work backwards towards the technology, instead of starting with the technology and then try to figure out a way to sell it, right? So this is kind of what we're all about. And this is what we are so adamant about, making sure that we start there. And you can see here on the left, you can see kind of the traditional way of innovation. We come up with an idea, we develop it, we spend time, we spend money, and we develop it, and we might test it a bit, then we launch it, only to find out that over here, there's no market need for it. Or it might be designed in a way that doesn't fit our users' needs, right? So what we are saying is that let's turn that thing around and let's do all that experimentation first. Let's do all the customer engagement first, and then we will have this informed concept that we can prototype and we can test. And it takes a lot less time, and it takes a lot less funding or resources to kind of get to that point where you can safely or more safely launch. There's nothing secure in the world of innovation or entrepreneurship, but at least you're taking the time to kind of do your experimentation first. And the reason why we think design has something to offer in this process is that we're not saying we should all be designers. I'm not a designer. I'm sure many of you are not designers. However, the mindset of the designer, this understanding of having to begin to understand the human need first before designing something, is key. And also the way of the designer of constantly exploring and discovering by going, framing, reframing, framing, reframing, actually flushes out a whole new world of different solutions we couldn't even think of. And we see this every day in our program by having the patients to take the time to go through these steps at the beginning, often and not tends to produce solutions that we didn't think about in the beginning. So design actually allows us to project, like in Italian, it's progettare. You're projecting human needs so you can better solve their problems, right? And design brings that, the process brings that, and it allows us to visualize the world before we actually go out and engage with it. So it kind of comes down to this one very simple question. Do you understand the need or problem you're trying to solve? And that is at the heart of our program. And that's kind of where we are. And we spend our lives basically trying to probe that and understand that. And what we've seen is that the teams who kind of commit to the human-centered approach to innovation, they achieve, or are more likely to achieve, this need solution fit. They use their funds better, they use their times better. And then also what happens is that because they're thinking about this with the end in mind, meaning that they're designing their solution for scaling, if that's what you want. You might want to scale big, or you might want to scale deep, meaning you want to have the absolutely perfect solution on the depth of it, or you just want to go and you want to conquer the world with your solution and reach as many people as possible. But depending on what impact you want to make, if you design your solution in the beginning with that in mind, we have seen that these solutions are able to scale much, much faster than the ones who kind of do not. So maybe on that note, I can turn this over to my colleague Gilad. Unless, Liz, are there any burning questions that we should address at the moment before we head over to Gilad? Oh, I can see you all. How nice is that? We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. Hi, good to see your faces. I think everyone should do this. It's not every day we are like with 500 people or whatever on the call. So very nice to see you all. Any questions, Liz, that you want to tackle now, or shall we head over to Gilad?
I think we can go ahead and have Gilad get started, and then we can kind of compile some questions and ask them during the Q&A session in a bit.
Excellent. Gilad, over
Okay,
to you.
I will take it away then. Okay, up and running?
Up and running.
Yep, first question of Zoom. Great, I'm just gonna, pardon me one second. All right. So welcome, it's great to be here. I'm really happy to see so many people out there in the audience. Sometimes you talk to a screen and you don't know if there's like 2 or 3 people, but I know there's hundreds and hundreds, so this is fantastic. Hello from MIT with probably the craziest background I could have found, which actually is great for the conversation we're about to have on complexity of problems. Behind me is something extremely complex. It's actually a drawing that, it's a mural that has so much going on in it. And this is my meeting room. And I've been in here, I don't know, hundreds of times. Every time I see something different, and every time I try to figure something out, I don't, because it leads me down a different path. And it's in a way a great segue into what I'm about to speak about, which is how we understand and deal with complexity of problems. So first of all, there's 2 terms I'm sure many of you are familiar with. There's complex problems and there's a complicated problem. And these are 2 very different things. So a complicated problem, like a math problem, can be solved, right? There is a way to solve it. There may be 2 ways of solving it, but there tends to be one answer, and you can get to it. With a complex problem, or with complexity of problems, you don't necessarily ever solve them, because when you try to solve them, it creates new elements within the same problem that can't be solved. And it creates this issue where we try to deal with very large, wicked problems of the world, of which there are many, and we never quite solve them, right? Because we think they're complicated, and if we can just get to a solution, we move on to the next thing. And I think history has proven to us that we don't. We are dealing with things that are out of our control. We're dealing with many people. We're dealing with the perspective of many people. And it means that we have to approach complexity of problems in a different way. So the first thing we need to do is really frame the problem, and to understand, kind of drawing on what Svafa was talking about in the beginning here, we have to understand what it is that matters to people, or what it is that is pressing on people's lives. What are the needs, and how can we differentiate them perhaps between different people, and understand where it is that we're going to step in. When I say we, I mean us as entrepreneurs, or as problem solvers, or as politicians or as leaders of units within a company that have to deal with things all the time. Every day we wake up with a to-do list, and the to-do list, maybe somebody achieves their to-do list every day. I don't. It just grows and grows and grows, and I start connecting dots. But I wake up every morning and I kind of frame my own to-do list, and realizing that I'm never going to finish everything. I'm never going to finish all my work, and I'm never going to solve all the problems that I want to solve. But I do have to frame and understand both within a certain time and within perhaps a certain set of urgency, what has to be done first, and what am I capable of doing, or what is my team capable of doing? And then how can that make a difference, right? How am I going to tackle this complex problem, not solve it completely, but make a difference, make an impact for many reasons, either for a social impact, an environmental impact, or a financial impact. If if I have a bottom line I have to deal with within my company, how can I improve that? So it's a matter of framing, and it's also a matter of identifying stakeholders. Stakeholders are everybody that is either impacting or impacted by the complex problem that I'm dealing with. And when we understand who we're working with and who we're working for, and not necessarily categorizing people, but understanding where they fit and how they're connected, and they're connected in very complex ways, trust me, we can then start to, again, frame the problem and understand the people, and then make a plan to actually make a difference, to make a change, a positive change with the issue that we're dealing with. I'll give you a few examples in a minute, but the original question here is, can you solve complex problems? And so if a complex problem, before we answer that, although I guess I already did, but we say complex problems they're not linear, right? And they're not finite, because they continue on, after we see them, as humans, as we've gone through this world, the problems usually continue, and new people are engaged, new issues arise. And just thinking of the what we're seeing here on the screen, when we build a city, I've yet to see a city that was built and then that's it, we're done. I happen to live in a city that every other building seems to be under construction, because they're tearing the old ones down and putting up new ones. We're tearing up our streets to put in new transit lane systems. We are redefining what happens on the streets or in plazas. So it's constantly being rebuilt, reconstructed. Energy, of course, is a whole other a very complex issue. How we're going to generate energy in the future. Our need for energy is only growing. Actually, it's growing incredibly. And the way we get energy and the way we distribute energy involves not just how we plug something into the wall, but involves the politics of land far away from where we live. The third one there is actually a picture of Airbnbs in Amsterdam. And so Airbnb is actually a really good example, and Uber as well, of two large startups that came in with a good idea. It still is a good idea. I think I use them both, and I'm sure most of the people here do too. But we should also be aware of the impact that both of these companies have had. And it's a great innovation. How to approach what was a different problem to begin with has created new problems, right? Airbnb has created a lot of problems in cities that now have fewer rental apartments on the marketplace, because they've been turned into housing for tourists. Uber has, of course, in some places decimated the taxi industry, and people whose entire livelihood for the past 30, 40 years was driving a taxi, who are now not included in that system. So yes, there was an original goal. Why am I bring this up? There was an original goal to solve a problem. Uber wanted to make getting around easier, getting a taxi easier. Airbnb wanted to give you an opportunity to two things: make money off of your home when you're not there, and to rent a better experience when you're visiting another city. However, it's created a whole complexity of new problems. And we often ask for 1 second. We often ask people that we work with to think about the future a little bit. Learning from the past, it should be easy to think about the future. I think humans all of us have a little trouble doing that. We think it might be different, but I really encourage everybody to think a problem through. So then when I think of like large problems that we're dealing with now in the world, we can't solve migration. Migration has always been happening since day one of humans on this planet, and it will continue. We also can't solve climate, right? Climate is an evolving power on this planet, right? It's changing differently now, faster, and we do have. I purposely didn't say solving climate change or climate crisis. It's climate in general, right? The issues that we're dealing with in climate, and actually I'll save that for 2 slides from now, can be divided up into very, very different, complicated problems that we can start to tackle. And that is where we want to get to. Another one that's actually very, very current and new is, I'm sure everyone has been aware of this issue, either by watching the news or by waiting for products that don't arrive. If you're running a company and you have a lot of raw material that's not arriving, or if you're simply going to a store and certain products are not there. There's a major issue with supply chain logistics globally. And this is partly because we have a very global economy, and things are not just made in one place and sent to another, they're made in 18 different places. And if one thing goes wrong somewhere, it affects the supply chain. If there's a bottleneck in one place, it affects the supply chain in 30 other places. And we're experiencing this now. We've never had an issue the way it's panning out right now globally with supply chain logistics. So this is something that shows that complex problems they can be social, environmental, and financial as well, and they can be found in basically in every facet of life that we experience. We can also just experience it personally. Whoever here has moved to a new city or country and then moved away realizes that it's not so simple just to pack up and go and open up a new bank account or close a new bank account, or dealing with healthcare, or what do you do first in order to get established. There's many examples in different cities and countries around the world that show just how difficult it is. And it's not just a matter of putting the to-do list and getting one done before the other. So I think we can understand this, not just at the level of climate or hundreds of millions of people moving around the world, but even yourself. And if you think about it that way, you can also imagine all the different problems and opportunities that exist globally or locally that are complex in nature, but have certain issues that you can actually understand and start to design a solution for, a piece of that complexity. So how do you deal with complexity? When I'm talking about complexity in problems, I'm not talking about the concept of complexity in general. That's sort of a different topic. But how do we flow with complexity in issues like the ones I just described and other ones that I'm sure everybody could think of? So we say you flow with complexity, right? You deal with complexity. You don't solve it. So now when I think about just 2 of those issues that we raised on the prior slides, climate change or supply chain logistics, I can think of dealing with the climate change that I'm going to have to perhaps conserve energy. How can we design different ways to conserve energy? We can, of course, deal with things physically by building levees. We do this, of course. How can we do it better, though? Or how can we plan for the future? We often wait until a disaster happens before we deal with it. If we understand that we're not going to solve climate change as one topic, but we can deal with things within it. How can we raise structures? And this is being done. I just heard today actually on the news here in close to Boston, there's this place that it's flooding more and more every year because the tides are rising a little bit. And they decided, let's just raise the whole the whole parking lot and the whole building there, and we're good for 30, 40 years, right? And maybe that's the way they're flowing. They're not solving it forever, right? Sometimes we do have to do things for 30, 40 years. It's a shame, if we can do this for 2,000 years, like perhaps the Romans or the Greeks did when they built certain things that we still use, that would be wonderful. But we have to determine, perhaps within the resources or within certain ambitions, what we can do. But we can't do things for 1 year, and we can't do things catching up. We have to really think into the future. Same thing with supply chain logistics, right? There's one thing is to deal with, well, if you have a bottleneck, we'll make things bigger, expand the ports, and actually that's been done a lot. But then another way of approaching it is, well, what if we didn't have so many things shipped around the world and we had more things manufactured at home, meaning whatever country you happen to live in? What if we had a different way of manufacturing in general? And there are a few people dealing with this with 3D, the topic with 3D printing is, we've been talking about this for probably 20 years now. It's actually emerging as a really viable technology now. We're able to do this faster and with better materials. Certain things don't have to be shipped. Certain things can be made at home. And sometimes it takes economics to force us to do this, to make a change. Sometimes we wait until we're hit with massive floods before we react. But what if, we, instead of waiting for the immediate urgency, we actually thought ahead of time, and we dealt with complexity, we flow with the complexity, we start to think of approaching it with certain technology or policy that we can do with the people that we know we can do it with, and start making a change. And then together, maybe when everybody comes together and deals with this, we in a way do solve complexity. Maybe the solution for complex problems is just flowing with it and always being one step ahead of it, and making sure that the majority of people or plurality of people are coming out better. When we talk about DesignX, we say, okay, what is the goal for us as an accelerator, back at MIT, or what is the goal for anybody creating a new business or product or service or process? It's to improve, right? We always want to improve the bottom line. We always want to make an impact that is positive. There might be some who don't. I'm not going to address that, but I'm talking about the people who do want to make the world better. There's no shortage of ways to do that. We just want you to look at it that you can't solve one gigantic problem with one hit of the racket. And when you start to do it that way, it's really hard, right? You have to have a framework, and you have to have a goal that's attainable. And it doesn't mean that you're not trying to deal with an issue that is as big as climate change or migration or the need for food security, or the need to keep your business operating and ready for the future. You have to take it down to material that you can actually deal with and start to design a solution for. So with that, I'm just going to tie it up here a little bit with what we do in our program and what we do in our course. We make sure that you have something that is solvable, right? That you understand, you have an understanding of the people you want to serve and the needs that exist, and where you fit in the world, and where you as a entrepreneur or innovator or team member understand that your position and how you can be a part of a solution, whether it's within a corporation as an entrepreneur, whether it's a social innovation, whether you're a politician even, or an entrepreneur. There's a place for everybody to design a solution and to make the world or your own home a better place. So hope that all ties in there, and I hope there's going to be some questions, because it's one thing to talk, it's much better to answer questions. So I'm going to, I guess, end with this slide here, but really, Liz, I guess this is where I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great. Yes, thank you so much, Svafa and Gilad. That was so interesting. And we do have some questions ready. So first, I'm going to share a question from René from Sao Paulo. So she's asking about cultural differences, right? So for example, some cultures, for example, Japanese cultures, the Japanese culture, it's not so polite to potentially complain or say they're unhappy with the solution. Other cultures may tend to hold back and maybe pretend that everything is okay. And they've dealt with, such intercultural issues several times. So any suggestions or tips in terms of dealing with different cultures in talking about human-centered innovation?
I can take this one. What a great question, actually. What a fantastic question. And you're spot on. It's not necessarily what people say, or the loudest voice doesn't always have the most important question. So there's this trick. It actually comes from Japan, oddly enough, because you're talking about Japan, is that constantly asking why. And the Japanese talked about, it was Toyota actually initially who came up with this, is that you ask why 5 times. So if you are engaging with someone and you feel that they are really polite and they don't really tell you everything, and you can see it in the body language. So the first rule of thumb is like, engage. Make sure that you're speaking to people. May they be in Japan or Iceland or America or Latin America, where they are. If you have a problem you want to solve, you cannot solve it in your living room or in your office. You have to kind of get out there and talk to the people you think actually will be your user, or be the people who are the people who have the problem. So the first one is you just kind of ask the first question, why? Why are you experiencing this? What's happening in your neighborhood? Whatever the issue is. And then the next layer is, why is that? And then they give you an answer. And then you say, why is that? And then you give the next answer, like, why is that? And then eventually what happens is you kind of come to the core of the problem. And I've been working all over the world for the last 30 years. I can't believe it's that long. But so, and you kind of pick up on this immediately. So some culture totally open and everything is terrific or everything is terrible. But if you have a methodical way of kind of peeling that onion, you get down to it. If you take the time to talk to them and really ask these why, you eventually come to the heart of it. So my advice would simply be, don't get discouraged if you don't get the answer right away. Just keep at it and take the time to do that.
Thank you so much for taking my question. Best regards from Brazil.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Renee, and thanks, Svafa, for that insightful answer. Next question. Is it possible to develop solutions that don't negatively affect anyone? So how do you kind of weigh the pros and cons? Maybe the solution that you come up with has negative impacts in another area. So how do you balance that?
So
you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take it because it comes up all the time in companies that we work with, and also as a planner, this happens all the time when you try to solve or create a better scenario in a city. It's going to have adverse effects on somebody. It would be wonderful if there would be no negatives, but there often are negatives. Not everything, not every new device or idea will have a negative, and that's great. But there will sometimes be a time that you'll realize, you know what, if this innovation works, I'm going to create, and it creates 20,000 new opportunities, new jobs, and it helps save thousands of lives. But I also might put 1,000 people out of work. You have to be aware of that, and maybe talk to those people or talk to the union and see, well, what happens when this, when this innovation, which is good, and which is creating a better world for sure, but will have a negative effect on some people. I'm not talking about deaths. That's a different issue altogether, and that's a different discussion, really, when that we shouldn't have to have in this conversation. But I'm talking about, when it comes to jobs or money or opportunities, that happens a lot. One quick example: there was a highway here in Boston that had across the state. In Massachusetts, it's a toll highway, and probably see this in every part of the world now. And the toll highway had toll booths, and you would drive down and give money to a person, right? And you still do this in lots of places. And they decided 5 years ago that this doesn't make sense anymore. We have cameras, and we can do this automatically with transponders. So they got rid of all the toll booths, and several hundred people who worked at these toll booths lost their jobs. Right? They weren't moved to a new job. They simply, something had to be done. Now when the state made that innovation, which was good for everybody, it was good for the environment, far less pollution, and in the end of the day, it costs less for the state to run the system. So it's good. And those people who were working those jobs, they were not good jobs. It's standing on the side of a highway with horrible exhaust fumes all day long. It's actually a very unhealthy job that if we can eliminate, it should be. So sometimes you have to, again, frame it and see, okay, we're creating something that might be negative for somebody, especially if that's their job, that's their livelihood. But then how do you mitigate that? And the state in this case did. They made sure that everybody did have a job either within the state somewhere, or they helped them or took care of them financially until they were reestablished. And in the end of the day, 5 years later, it's not a question that this was a better thing to do. All right, that's an easy example to look at. There's lots of other ones that might be more sort of less transparent, but you do have to weigh it. And you have to, again, like with Airbnb, if they played it out, what might happen, if they cared, I mean, I'm not saying they don't care, but if they thought, okay, the negative effects here, what can we do about it to begin with? The problem with, and I'll end with this, the problem is with a lot of people when you're creating a new business, especially in a very competitive business world and a startup world where sometimes you're competing with people very fast, you might not think of that, but you should.
Actually, to piggyback a little bit on that, it's actually really interesting to do this with startups. So we do that every day. That's kind of our day job. So to ask a startup founder to try to project what could happen if they become wildly successful. And some people have no problem doing that because they can envision at scale. But for many people, it's even hard to see until next week. Right? So what we do is we have kind of like a series of exercises that help you methodically kind of go through this step by step. But of course, designing an innovation or a startup is not a linear process. It's a circular process. So what happens ultimately is that by pairing the stakeholders, who are the people who are going to be impacted both positively and negatively, and you try to kind of stand in their shoes, if you will. And then you say, okay, if I achieve, a moderate amount of success, what will happen? If I become an Airbnb, what will happen? I promise you the Airbnb guys did not realize that they were about to ruin the downtown housing market in Amsterdam or whatever. They didn't set out to do that. And I saw one of the comments in the chat. They just did this because there was a housing shortage. There was a supply chain problem within San Francisco hotel market, right? And here we have housing in Amsterdam being out of people's reach, right? So that's why, kind of really having some tools and techniques to try to visualize what might or might not happen helps. We don't have a crystal ball, we can tell for sure, but going through several iterations of exercises help you at least project what might or might not happen and do what Gilad was explaining.
Thank you so much for those answers, you two. All right, next up, we have a very interesting question from Natalia. She wrote in the chat that McKinsey has estimated that the digital revolution can potentially leave 1.2 billion people around the world kind of behind, that may become unemployed and who are not equipped kind of with that basic education that they'll need to succeed in today's day and age. What potential solutions do you two see for this giant, very complex problem? So
it is, okay, so this is giant and complex, and it's also, it's also to a large degree political. Both political within nations and globally. We've already seen a couple revolutions. We've seen an industrial revolution. First of all, an agrarian revolution, and then an industrial revolution, and we're already into a digital revolution for some time now. And if we didn't sort of follow innovation and live by it, which is what happens to humanity. One could say it's impossible to hold back innovation. You can regulate it. You can have rules, and some countries have rules for this. Some countries also, and I say countries because it really is, unfortunately, we do need governing powers really to help shape the future for everybody. while this revolution happens. And this digital revolution is absolutely happening. One thing is to say, well, let's just hold back a bit of innovation and make sure things can be analog and digital, or make sure that we create jobs that certain people can do. Another approach is, well, what if we have people transform their skill set to be able to deal with the new world, and we have to do that. And perhaps this is just my opinion, but and it might take decades. It's not a question that we do this overnight, right? But we're seeing this play out. I think what happened with COVID is it fast forwarded a lot of questions. It fast forwarded the way and we're seeing this. In the States, it's a little bit different than other parts of the world. What's happening with employment? There's a lack of people to fill in jobs. But some of those jobs are not digital, right? A lot of jobs created by the digital revolution include driving trucks, right? So there's a lack of tens of thousands of truck drivers in the United States alone. I know England has the same issue, and this is not a high-tech job, right? I mean, driving a truck is different than it was 30 years ago by a little bit, but not much. Now, the next step, though, is thinking, well, and I'll just end this on the trucks, is there's been a lot of work now on autonomous vehicles. Now, it's not happening tomorrow, it's not happening in 10 years or even 30 years, but we will get to a point where we're going to have a lot more things on the road driving themselves. And, a lot of people would say, well, it makes no sense to have truck drivers working 8 hours, behind the wheel. It's, again, not necessarily the greatest job. Evidence is there's not enough people to fill them. So certain jobs, again, should become digital. The question is, what will be the other jobs? I think the market does tend to create those or demand those eventually, but it shouldn't be a reason for stopping innovation. It should be a reason, just like the negative effects of playing out the consequences of success or of the implementation of technology.
Maybe also, I cannot even begin to answer this question but to your point, I think it's a great question because it's large and it's complex and it's very, very daunting, if you will. So it's perfect for this conversation. So what I would probably do is, instead of trying to figure out the answer to it, there is a process to get there, right? So human-centered innovation is around trying to peel that onion. Yes, there's the problem statement. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs because of, the advances in technology. Let's assume that's the problem. So what happens is that through that process of framing that problem, what is the problem exactly? Where does it lie? Who has it? What are the stakeholders? What is the impact going to be? So it trickles all the way from the person losing their jobs to the education system, to the quality of life, to whatever it may be. So if this was in one of our let's say one of our startups trying to kind of figure this one out, or one of our innovation projects trying to figure this one out, what we would do is we would kind of take that tree down, or that onion down to its core. And then the innovation team would say, okay, which piece of this am I passionate about solving? And I actually saw a question in the chat, like, what are the roles needed for an effective startup team? So it kind of comes down to this, is that you take that problem and you fleece those layers off until you see a part where you are really passionate about solving. This is where you can make a difference, that you have that passion, but also you have that skill, or you can find and identify people with that skill. So every startup is different, every innovation project is different, and the skills needed are different. The only thing they have in common, the two things. You have to have kind of the passion for solving the problem, because innovation and entrepreneurship, and I don't need to tell you that, I'm sure you have the same experience, it's hard work, right? So you have to be passionate about it, but then also you need to be able to understand the problem enough so you can identify the interdisciplinary skills needed to solve it. So a gigantic problem like this, there's not one discipline going to solve it. There's not one scientist going to solve it. It's not one technician or one politician that's going to solve it. It is by working together through a process of discovery and really mapping out and starting with the human needs and all that kind of good stuff. Eventually, you have a host of solutions. And by having a host of solutions, you can maybe chip away at this gigantic problem. So I think it's kind of in that mindset that I would kind of approach this.
Thank you, you two. That was, I know, a big, complex question. Next.
Thank you very much for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Natalia. All right, our next question comes from Blanca. She asks, what can we do when stakeholders show resistance to change? Maybe they say, oh, well, we've always done it this way. So how can someone help stakeholders kind of see the bigger picture?
You want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take this one, and so, you know, a lot of people don't like. A lot of people resist change. A lot of people don't want to move. A lot of people don't want to have their job description changed. It's human nature, not for everybody. Some people actually like change. I like things to be shaken up a bit. But for those who don't want, if it's in the way of innovation for others, then or for improving lives of others, then sometimes you have to either work with them to show them the way, and you can, and it takes a while. It's not just a matter of sending a letter or a quick education campaign, but there is a way of engaging people and actually hearing why. You know, again, to Svafa's earlier point, you know, why are they against something? Why don't they want something to happen? And actually, when you do that, when you don't get into a I guess an argument or a sort of stating a fact that this is what's going to happen and you shouldn't be against it, because it makes no sense to tell somebody you shouldn't be against it. Just like when I tell my child you should not be upset, it doesn't work. That my child's still upset. You know, you have to ask. You know, what's the problem? What's the problem? And eventually you find out. And it could be something that you could have never thought of before, and you'll realize, okay, well, let's try to deal with that issue. You also might find a way, right? You know, to find mutual. You know, the best thing to do, because it's a negotiation, right? So if you want to do something and somebody is against what you want to do, then it's about negotiating to find out the best scenario for both, right? Not to have one winner. Right? A negotiation should always have two winners. And both sides, one might get more than the other monetarily or commercially, or you know, they might think they win, but they'll only win really if both sides do. And so when you do have a negotiation that might require money, or it might require creating it might involve creating an additional piece of your product to suit them. And I'm kind of talking globally, using a direct example, but there's so many. If you're building a road and you have to, or building a new transit line, and you have to take down somebody's real estate along the way. You're creating a transit line to help 20 million people travel and reduce emissions for the city. Then one person's house might be something that is in the way. But then that person, they'll explain it's not just the fact that they're not getting enough money for their house. It's also the emotional connection they have to their house, right? I mean, nobody wants their house to be taken down, right? But if there's some way of keeping a community together, so it's not just about money, but it's about helping the community or helping somebody's maintain their dignity. You'll find out that's the reason why, not the fact that they want $1 million. So I hope that kind of gets to some type of an answer. Again, we're talking globally. Every issue, every place, every culture is different, but the approach should be the same, of getting to the root of a problem and getting to the root of somebody's emotional issues as well, not just blanketing them as a category.
There's also a really good book on that has parts of this in it. So if you have a chance, there's a book. There's this guy from Google who used to run the innovation center for Google's innovation lab, or whatever they call it over there. So his name is Jake Knapp, and he works with us at MIT as well. And he wrote the book called The Design Sprint. So within 5 days, they just go, and it's a really cool approach to kind of get to some of the issues you talk about here. How do you can really get to the heart of the resistance, if you will. And so if you have a chance, take a look at that book. It's called The Design Sprint by Jake Knapp. And easy to read, really practical book with a method that Google used very successfully for years and years and years. So that might be worth taking a look at. Liz, there was a question I saw. Someone asked a really interesting question. They said, how is this different from design thinking? Shall we take that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yes.
Before we run out of time.
Yes. Yes. I was just say we have about 10 minutes left, so we can probably take, I would say, maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I thought it was a really, really good question, because design thinking is very much this approach to the ideation of things. So they do a great job, and we draw a lot on the ideas of design thinking in that initial phase, where you're trying to understand not just the problem you're interested in solving, but actually the underlying need or a problem. And as we all know, people don't necessarily tell you straight off the bat what is the problem and why it is, why do they have it. So you really have to be able to kind of stand in their shoes, if you will, and trying to visualize a day in their life. And not everybody can do that. Design thinking is a great way to kind of reenact that, if you will. So design thinking is a great tool to kind of get to the core of that. However, what we talk about is we use a lot of those techniques and tools, the prototyping and the stakeholder mapping and the needs analysis and all those kinds of neat tools that designers use and design thinking has made famous. But what we do then is, and what human-centered innovation is all about, is that you take it from there to build a company around it, or you take it from there to actually make it happen. Design thinking often just stops at the individual product or solution level. They basically say, hey, here's the right solution for this. Let's go ahead and do that. But innovation is much more than that initial stage. So human-centered innovation takes it, from that ideation stage all the way into the hands of the people who are using it. May it be the necessary processes and procedures and the teams and the budgets and the financial planning and the scale planning. That is all a very important part of taking an idea and turning an idea into action. So human-centered innovation is about that entire journey from, hey, I think I have an idea, or at least I have a problem, and then taking it all the way to the moment when you launch it and you scale it into the marketplace. So that's kind of the main difference, if you will.
And there's one last thing on that. The design thinking, it's very much about the user, about often about one individual, or finding a persona that is representing many individuals. What we tend to believe or do is look not at just the individual, but at all of society, or all of much bigger, all the stakeholders involved, and make sure that they're part of the design as well.
Thank you so much, because I know that's important to explain the distinction there. So I think, we may have time for a few more. Do you have any success stories that you can share with us that have come from MITDesignX?
Where to begin? It's nothing to do with us, unfortunately. They're just brilliant teams who happen to kind of use this methodology to the fullest, which is our pleasure to kind of see happen and help them on their way. Maybe the first one that comes to mind, Gilad, might be the BioBot story.
Yeah.
So BioBot is a company that began. There was a woman who is doing her PhD in biochemistry, and she came up with this idea: would it be possible to develop a technology there are informal filters that go into our sewer system, and by dipping it into the sewer system, what they managed to do, and her colleague actually is an architect and a planner, so you have this perfect team. Back to the question about how should teams be formed. So you have the scientist and you have the city planner teaming up on something relating to public health in cities. And their research question was basically, how do we make cities safer from a health perspective? So what they did is they came up with this technology. You dip it into the source system, and in real time, it can tell you, is COVID increasing in my street? Is it increasing on Gilad Street? Is it increasing downtown? Usually, this can take months in the regular system. So this very simple piece of technology, it's not simple to create, but on the face of it, it's very simple. And the digital solutions go with it, is now protecting over 100 million Americans. And in real time, can monitor what's happening, not by asking people questions, but without being gross, but whatever goes into your body goes down there, So it's a very, very, very useful tool to monitor real time what's happening. Maybe COVID, maybe the flu, maybe the opioid addiction, maybe whatever's happening. And they have now scaled this, and they are like 100 million people protected. They have a large team. They've fundraised all of, from here to kingdom come. So that was one of the, I would say, the most interesting cases to come out of DesignX in
yeah, and then second one, maybe I'll throw in is Airworks. And what Airworks does is they take aerial. First of all, they realize that there's an issue with the way we survey buildings and properties. So if you're building a new building, or demolishing an old one and building a new one in its place, which is happening more and more now, you first of all need a survey. You need the people to go out, and we've all seen them go out with their sticks and look through them. And we use lasers now, but it's the same technology as 100 years ago. These guys said, this is ridiculous. We have drones. A drone can do this. That was their starting point. And they said, okay, we'll do a drone and we'll get the information. But then they realized that, okay, it's not just about getting the survey, it's turning that what you measure into a drawing. And that process can take weeks, because it involves somebody going out there, mapping it, creating a drawing. The architect then takes that and makes it into a better drawing, and then you submit it to the city to get your permit. Weeks. And right now, actually, that's the second part of the story, because let me tell the first part. So they developed the technology using AI to take an aerial photograph, whether from a drone or from something else, and turn that into a CAD drawing, into an engineering drawing that will show every line and identify a tree, the center of a tree, whether it's a handicapped parking spot, and everything about a building. And they can do this in like 6 hours, something that would take normally a couple of weeks. And so one would say, to leading a previous question was about, well, what about the people who lose their jobs? So those surveyors, right now, to get a surveyor, you're waiting like 1 to 2 months in the United States. There's a massive shortage of surveyors, and it's not a job that people are really getting into anymore in the way they used to. Some people still do. So in a way, this technology is like right on time, and they're having an incredible growth spurt as well. Raised a lot of money and doing a lot of increased technology to build their business. So that's the second one.
Good. Thank you for all your questions. I know we're out of time, right, Liz?
Yes. So just in this last minute, I want to take another opportunity to thank you both, Gilad and Svafa. We really appreciate your insights and you joining us here today. This has been wonderful. And also a big thank you, muchas gracias, obrigada, to all of our participants as well, and your wonderful, insightful questions. We've included links in the chat here to our survey after the session. So please, if you wouldn't mind spending a moment or two filling in that survey, that will help us improve the webinars going forward into the future. And again, big thank you to everyone. Again, Svafa and Gilad's course, Designing High Impact Solutions, begins November 30th. And as you can see on the screen here, we have QR codes that you can check out the course page. And I think that's it. So thanks again to everyone and have a wonderful day.